The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I ask leave of the House to move a motion forthwith that this House censures the Prime Minister for his continued deceiving of the Australian people in relation to 1. His management of the economy and his threats to impose new burdens on Australian families through higher interest rates and higher taxation. 2. His failure after 12 years in office to tackle the fundamental problems of Australia's current account deficit. 3. The massive accumulation of foreign debt under his stewardship. 4. His failure to provide a stable and predictable environment in which families and small businesses can plan their futures. 5. For presiding over a nation in which the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. And 6. His cynical use of interest group politics at the expense of timber workers and their families.
Leave granted. Leave is granted. Order.
You're going to bring it on? You're going to bring it on?
Order.
You're going to just yes or no. You're going to bring it on.
Resume your seat.
You're going to take it?
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat.
Take it. Yes or no? You're going to take it? Take it.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat, both. The Leader of the Opposition has sought leave to move that motion. I am turning to the government to ask if they accept.
Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition had a very poor question time. He wants to recover it.
Order!
I will, of course, join issue with him with pleasure.
He's accepted it. All right?
Yeah. Well, Mr Speaker, I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition moving forthwith that this House... I move that this House censures the Prime Minister for his continued deceiving of the Australian people in relation to his management of the economy, his threats to impose new burdens on Australian families through higher interest rates and higher taxation, his failure after 12 years in office to tackle the fundamental problems of Australia's current account deficit, the massive accumulation of foreign debt under his stewardship. 4. His failure to provide a stable and predictable environment in which families and small businesses can plan their future. 5. Presiding over a nation in which the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. And finally, his cynical use of interest group politics at the expense of timber workers and their families. Mr Speaker.
Order. Before you start, before the honourable member for Bennelong, the Leader of the Opposition, starts, I again appeal to those in the gallery. A censure motion in this parliament is the most serious motion that can be moved. Both of those people most concerned with this will have a chance to speak, and I'm sure put interests that are represented by people in the gallery, give them that courtesy. Otherwise, the attendants will be asked to clear the galleries. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I might say in the 20 years that I've been in Parliament, that is the first time I've ever heard a Speaker make that threat. The first time I've heard that threat be made, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself for orchestrating that.
Order. Now, Leader of the Opposition, just calm down. Nothing has been orchestrated. I've heard your comment just there. It's not a threat. I am simply suggesting to those in the gallery we want to hear, in this place, there is no threat. That is the standing orders of this parliament, which those in this place constantly remind me to uphold. The Leader of the Opposition on the censure motion. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Mr Speaker, this is the first sitting of the Parliament in this year, and that this Parliament sits at a time when the mood of the Australian people can best be summarised as a mood of total uncertainty and total bewilderment, verging on anger and frustration. And today we have been treated from the Prime Minister with a prime example of why that mood exists in the Australian community. If ever a man has demonstrated before the National Forum of the Australian people that he is arrogantly out of touch with how the Australians feel, it is the Prime Minister today. He has strutted this stage. He has behaved as though he presides like a triumphal, successful emperor over the greatest economy that the world has ever seen. And yet the reality, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely otherwise. And this kind of insufferable, conceited, arrogant, out-of-touch attitude on the Prime Minister's part is not confined, of course, to the Prime Minister. It runs right like a river of deceit right through the whole of the government. Now let me give you an example, and I want everybody opposite and those in the gallery to listen to this, and it gives you an idea of the problem not only that this government has got, that this man, Paul J. Keating, has got, but also the enormous problem that the Australian people have got. And the other day, this is what the Treasurer said, and I quote, "The basic economy is in terrific shape." And he went on to say, except this external side, which is obviously not so flash, and we need to address this, end of quote. And one of the more whimsical erudite of the parliamentary press gallery had this to say this morning, and I quote, "That's like saying the Titanic was in terrific shape, not counting the iceberg." And Mr. Speaker, that is the problem. I mean, the greatest worry is that this man is so invincibly ignorant of the problem that this country has. And what the Australian public really cannot understand is that after enduring 3 to 4 years of the worst recession in 60 years, the worst recession in 60 years. I mean, the Prime Minister is very fond of quoting history. Well, let me just say one thing to him about that. You can rabbit on as much as you like about the past. The more you talk about the past, the more you proclaim your embarrassment about the present and that you have nothing to say about the future. So you can go on. You can rabbit on. You can talk about 1981. You can talk about John Howard and Malcolm Fraser. You can talk about Sir Henry Parkes and the Prophet Moses. But nothing will relieve you of the responsibility you carry for what you are doing to Australian families at the present time. Now let me just remind you while we're talking history, and then we'll get to the future, which is what the Australian public want to hear from John Howard and Paul Keating about over the next 12 months. Just let's remind us, who gave us the worst recession in 60 years? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest unemployment since the Great Depression? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest current account deficit on record? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest level of foreign debt since the Great Depression? Paul Keating. Who gave us the highest... Oh, it's all right for him to do it, but it's not all right for me. It's all right for him, but not all right for me.
For those... Order. Those in this place who constantly lecture me on the standing orders, think about it. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And if I may continue, Mr. Speaker,
and the Prime Minister will have his chance.
Who gave us the highest sustained levels of interest rates since the Great Depression? Paul Keating. And finally, who gave us record levels of bankruptcies and small failures? None other than the same Paul Keating. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have opened this political year with the news that Australia has the worst current account deficit on record. We were told 2 days ago by the Treasurer that the estimate of the current account deficit had blown out from $18 billion to $26 billion. And that is against the background that when this man became the Treasurer of Australia, our accumulated foreign debt was $21 billion, and it is now over $180 billion. And there is one thing that the Australian people can't understand, and if you took time off from your political hobbies and you became a full-time Prime Minister again instead of a part-time Prime Minister, you might spend a little bit of time going around talking to the Australian people, and you might hear them saying one thing, they would say it in different ways, but they're the basic, and some of them would say it politely, and some of them would say it ever so impolitely. And what they would say is a very simple thing, is, I don't understand this. Our Prime Minister told us that if we endured the pain of the recession, there would be some dividend and there would be some gain. In other words, if we suffered the pain and the discomfort of high interest rates, if we lived through the difficulty of bankruptcy and failure, if we were a small business operator, if we lived through the agony of our children being out of work year after year, not because they were stupid or indolent, but because they couldn't get a job, that maybe at the end of the road there would be a little pain, there would be a little gain as a result of all of that pain. But what has happened, Mr Speaker? We have gone through the worst recession in 60 years. We have watched this man drive unemployment to its highest level since the Great Depression of the 1930s. We have seen horrendously high interest rates. We have seen Australian farmers groan under the weight of your failed industrial relations policy as well as your ruinous interest rate policies. We have watched you wait. In fact, you waited years before you recognised there was a drought, and then you cobbled something together and under the weight of absolutely unconscionable political pressure, and you are finally shamed into doing something about the plight of Australian farmers. And you showed more interest in the cost of tearing down the Cahill Expressway than you did about the plight of Australian farmers. And that will ever be to your political shame, that it took you so long to recognise the pain and suffering of the great rural areas of Australia. And that won't be forgotten. That won't be forgotten in the great rural areas of Australia. But, Mr Speaker, what the Australian people just don't understand is that the pain was supposed to deliver something. It was supposed to deliver a better Australia. It was supposed... Oh, he says it. Oh, it has. And he says it has. It's delivered a better Australia. I mean, this is the problem. This is the problem the Australian people have got. Here you've got a man who simply won't face the reality of his failure. Here is a man who would have us believe that you can run up an unacceptably high level of foreign debt. You can put this country in hock to foreigners. He struts the Australian stage talking about national independence, the Australian identity and national sovereignty, things that we all believe in. But he has done more in two areas to pawn the national sovereignty and dignity of this country since he's been Prime Minister and Treasurer than happened over the previous 50 years. And he's done it in two ways. He's run us into debt via the expansion and the explosion of our overseas debt, and he's also, through the illicit use of the external affairs power of the Constitution, he has utterly subverted the federal balance between the Commonwealth and the states. And he has used the external affairs power in a way in which it was never meant. But, Mr Speaker, what the Australian people can't understand is why should they have to suffer the indignity, the denial and the disappointment of a bare 5 minutes of economic sunlight, and then it's on again. I was talking to one of my state colleagues the other day who represents an electorate in the western suburbs of Sydney, and she said, you go door knocking and people say, I wouldn't have minded if after all the pain of the recession we were better off, but we're no better off. We watched interest rates go down for a little while and now they're going up again. This man who campaigned at the last election, and he's very fond of spelling words out. He spelled out jobs, J-O-B-S. Well, as everybody on this side reminded him, what about law, L-A-W? This is the man. This is the man. This is the man. This is the man who, before the last election, this is the man. I don't need protection from him. I'm perfectly happy. You just stay out of this. I'm perfectly happy. Now,
the LA opposition knows the standing orders.
I know them very well.
I am protecting you.
Yeah, I know. But I'm just saying I don't need it.
All right, I'll remember that.
Good old LA law over here. He told us before the last election. He told us before the last election, You know what he said? He said, I'm going to reduce income tax. And he said, you know why you can believe it? He said, because I said it and I've translated it into law. And I remember he standing up at the National Press Club and he said, these are legislated tax cuts. LAW law. We all know what happened after the last election. Not only did he tear up LAW law, but for good measure he increased the level of indirect taxation in a way that heavily impacted on the people that he's meant to represent. And yet such is the man's insufferable conceit and his political insensitivity and his infallible belief that he can get away with saying anything, and his characteristic of regarding the Australian people as being gullible, which I tell you they are not. They're fast waking up to you, and they're fast waking up to the sort of deception that you have practised over the years. But speaking only 2 days ago, he was asked something about increases in personal taxation. And this is against the background of the man who promised tax cuts before the last election but delivered tax increases. In other words, he did the exact opposite of what he promised he was going to do. And he was asked on the John Stanley program what was his attitude to personal taxation, and he said, I'm not ruling out anything except to say, have a look at our record in these things. Have a look at our record in these things. I mean, can I say I'd be delighted to look at your record in these things. And now listen, now this is the absolute.
Order. The member for Northern Territory.
This is the. No, you, Warren, should listen to this
Member
because
for
it's
Northern
very relevant to your seat. Speaking of members on the opposite, where's Barry Cunningham? I thought Barry might have been here, but I'll come to Barry's concerns in a moment. But this is what he had to say. He said, and you ought to listen to this, and everybody in the gallery ought to listen to this, because it really is a measure of the grand delusion of the Grand Emperor over here. And this is what he had to say. We've delivered on every tax commitment we've made since 1983. Well, he would. I mean, you would have that man over there. He would have to be the only person in Australia who really believes that. But of course, if you think that is the only sort of acme of delusion that's fallen from the lips of the Prime Minister, the man who, whenever anything is good, whenever anything comes right, he claims the credit. He's got Bernie Fraser in his right pocket. He's got hands on levers, and he's running everything. But when it goes wrong, oh no, Paul Keating's not to blame. No, not on your life. I mean, if it goes wrong, it's the fault of Malcolm Fraser. It's the fault of the foreigners. It's the fault of Alf Garland, Nobby Clark, Michael Codd, John Stone, Laurie Oakes, Bob Hawke, Wilson Tuckey, Andrew Peacock, Billy Snedden, Jack Burney, Frank Walker, George Campbell in the AMWU. I mean, the list just goes on and on. I mean, in other words, he's got a very, very simple prime ministerial principle. It's a very, very simple principle. It really is a very simple principle.
Order.
What you got to do, no, I don't respect it, but you got to acknowledge the cheek and the gall of it. If something accidentally goes right, I'm Captain Paul. But if it all goes wrong, don't blame me. I'm only the Prime Minister. You can't. It's a bit unfair. I'm entitled to be the Prime Minister. After all, I'm actually, as the Prime Minister, I'm actually doing you fellas a favour even turning up. I really am. Remember, don't think I'm exaggerating that. I didn't make that up. He was the bloke who said, basically question time is a courtesy extended by the executive to the Parliament. And dead right, he says. Dead right. I might be a bit deaf, but I caught up that interjection. So, Mr. Speaker, and so it goes on. And it wasn't the only sort of pearl of sort of insensitivity to say he's kept every tax promise. He also had something else to say in that same interview. He said, "The last year is the best economic year since the war." Full stop. Yeah, he said he believes it. I mean, I could tell by his response. He said it was the best. I mean, despite the fact that our current account deficit is the worst since, except Mexico's in the OECD area, despite the fact that we have an appallingly high level of foreign exposure, despite the fact that we have an appallingly high level of youth unemployment, despite the fact that we have the highest youth suicide rate in the world, despite all of these things, don't worry, it's the best since the war. It's the best we've had since the war. And of course, the other one that really caught my fancy, but I don't think it would catch the fancy, I say that only in political terms of the Australian people. When defending high interest rates, this is what he had to say. "I think people have got to say this is a premium I pay for my job security." In other words, what's the Prime Minister, what's he really saying? I tell you what he's really saying. He said, "You really should be happy that I'm putting up interest rates to save your job." That's a bit like saying it's a recession we had to have, isn't it, Prime Minister? It's a little bit like saying that, the interest rate rises we've got to have. Mr Speaker, this man is so utterly out of touch. This man is so arrogant. This man is so insufferably indifferent to the plight of ordinary Australian people that he's certainly insufferable to the plight of timber workers, and reminds me of that famous saying of the Leader of the House's father when he was lamenting the state of the Labor Party, and he said, "When I joined the Labor Party 40 years ago, it was run by the cream of the working class. It's now dominated by the dregs of the middle class."
Order is the order. Is the motion seconded?
Speaker, I second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, of course, I reject out of hand the claims of the Leader of the Opposition, reject them out of hand, and just say, Mr Speaker, it'll take more than the recitation of glib lines from a person without any original political thoughts, from a person who is a part-time thinker, and who has no original political ideas. It'll take more than a decade-long recitation of old rhetoric to win the next election for you. Mr Speaker, it was not by accident that the Liberal Party passed over John Howard when John Hewson lost the last election and went to him. It was not by accident they passed over John Howard to go to Alexander Downer after John Hewson was removed. He is the Liberal Party's third preference, but he wants himself to be, in his arrogance, Australia's first preference. Mr Speaker, this is the man who left behind, after 7 years of opportunity, a moribund, inward-looking industrial graveyard. An inward-looking industrial graveyard. A low growth, low investment, low profit, high inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment, high tariff country. And nobody can deny any one of those claims. Low growth, you average less than 2%. Low investment, low profits, 11% inflation, 22% interest rates at their peak, high unemployment, 10.5%, and high and growing tariffs. And on top of all that, undeniable, and on top of all that, an unproductive, inward-looking economy. One that was, now, as I said in the House at question time, today is 40% more competitive. Can you believe that any minister in an OECD country can quote a gap, a differential improvement of that dimension to a nation's competitiveness? 40%? The Australian economy today is 40% more competitive than when he was in office. And I'll tell you what else he left behind, Mr Speaker, a criminal tax avoidance system. A criminally evaded tax base. Now, I'll tell you what he did as well, Mr Speaker. When we thumbed through Bill O'Reilly and the then Tax Commissioner's telephone book of letters, you see him pleading to the clever little Treasurer, being silly and civil, understanding but not hearing. Please, Treasurer, help us put a suture on the criminal avoidance of the tax system, and for 5 years as Treasurer he failed to do anything. Until the McCabe-Lafranchi report presented, which he called a stunt. Mr Speaker, if he had any pride, he would drum himself out of public life. Anybody who did that to an economy, and let's get the record straight, Mr Speaker, let's get the record straight. In terms of GDP, apart from that inward-looking moribund economy left, the principal charge against him, in terms of the recession he presided over, 4.1% of GDP lost. In 1990-91, it was 1.8. He has the prize as the deepest recession since the war. Exactly. And if he wants to debate that, go and debate it with the Australian statistician. Now, go to the Australian statistician and ask him. Now, Mr Speaker, then he had the temerity to talk about tax cuts. This is the man who in the 1977 election said, ring up and find out how much a tax cuts will be. The Sydney Morning Herald with a hand holding the fistful of dollars. And then he took them away 5 months later. I mean, you humbug. You humbug. Now, Mr Speaker, he left, as I said, when I became Treasurer. He was like a man reborn. He sat on the opposition benches to thank God somebody else could inherit the problem and do something with it. And here it is after 12 years of change, 12 years that has made us now the fastest growing economy in the Western world with the lowest inflation rate. On that combination, 12 years later he brings his miserable political carcass back to the front bench of the Australian Parliament. Here he is politically limping in like the Bishop of Autun, the Talleyrand of the Liberal Party, scraping his way back into Australian history, seeking to put his miserable politics. Mr Speaker, what possible use in the modern Australia of the country joining the world, of its region for the first time in its history, of becoming an outward-looking country, of getting its low inflation, its high productivity, what possible use could it have for a man who described himself as the most conservative leader the Liberal Party has ever had? I mean, what use do you think you are to Indigenous Australia? What use do you think you are to Asia, to our integration? What use do you think you are to best practice? What use do you think you are to high investment? What use do you think you are to high participation rates in schools? You were quite happy to see, Mr Speaker, when he was in government, less than 3 kids in 10 complete secondary school. Less than 3 in 10. Now it's on 8 in 10. And for the first time in our history, more girls than boys go into university. More young women than young men go into university. He left them. He said if we keep them uneducated, we can run this as a sort of narrow elite in a sort of tied-up little education system. Mr Speaker, he's had 3 policies in public life only, and I've been here with him his whole political life. He came in 1974. His 3 policies: income splitting for families to give income to the high-income earners. That's one. Labour market reform, which is code for cutting the wages of people under $35,000. He opposed every wage increase since 1983 for the workforce, every single one through the centralised wage fixing system. When he stood up here, he believes in an American-style system where you had the American president standing before the Congress 3 weeks ago in his State of the Union address talking about the American working poor who haven't had a wage increase in 17 years. That's the kind of Australia John Howard wants. He believes rip the safety net from underneath them and they've got to take the contract. The same as America. They either huddle over the railway grates for warmth under a newspaper, or live in substandard accommodation, or live without health care. That's the sort of Australia this conservative apparatchik believes in. And then, of course, this sort of morbid rhetoric, the sort of small thrifty shopkeeper gnarlishness with the red tape of government spending. So we've got all this anti-government spending rhetoric, but in his day he was the big spender. That's right. The big spender. Mr. 28.8% of GDP. I mean, how can you come? Look, John, don't waste your time on me, son. Don't waste your time on me. I've been around. I know you. I know you. I know where the skeletons are in your closet. I know what Bill O'Reilly said to me in private about you as Treasurer and the criminal evasion of the tax system. I know how the tax office guys hung their head. And when I said we're going to basically fight the High Court on the tax base, that we're going to actually improve the tax base and make it impregnable, that we're going to bring in low tax rates and encourage greater compliance with the system, the whole bureaucracy lifted its head as if it was a new day. A new day, a new dawning. It was the dawning of integrity in Australian public finances. Mr. Speaker, and yet, Mr. Speaker, the most conservative party the Liberal Party has ever had wants to talk about the future. His 6.1% growth and 3.75% employment growth and the greatest fall in unemployment in a year, not about the future? Is that not about the future? Is the white paper on the unemployed to retrain Australia's unemployed, long-term unemployed and young people the greatest undertaking we've done in social policy since the war? Not about the future? Was the cultural policy support for our arts and multimedia and CD-ROM and the information highway not about the future? Was APEC, building for Australia abroad, an Asia-Pacific Rim market not about the future? And you're telling us you could have done it? Would you have got out there? Would you have threaded together APEC? Would you have believed in the social and cultural liberation of the cultural policy statement? Would you have believed in giving unemployed, long-term unemployed Australians income support, a job subsidy and a job compact? No way. Your leader of the opposition attacked it. Your then leader of the opposition attacked it. He said that it was. He said the white paper, Labor's spending spree, whatever the merits or otherwise, it is a spending spree. That's the contempt with which you held it. If that's not about the future, Mr. Speaker, when we hear from John Howard, the very much recycled leader of the opposition, we bring in, it's a case of back to the future. Back to the future. Back to the future. Now, years ago, Mr. Speaker, I did a little ditty in here about someone walking through a museum. And there they are looking, and the kid says, "Mum, what's that?" And she says, "Well, son, that's the Morphy Richards toaster. We used to have that. We used to put the bread in that, and you used to have to wind it down and turn it on. And what's this?" You know, there was a thing, he said, "That's the Qualcast mower. We had one of those at home."
Order.
And they said, "Who's this? Who's this wax figure here?" They said, "That's John Howard." John Howard. And he was the Treasurer who put Australia in a moribund low growth back in the 1970s and 80s. But what is he? What is he, Mum? Well, he's the future, son. He's the future, son. Don't make us laugh over there. Don't make us laugh over there. Mr. Speaker, John Howard believes in the glib phrase. He thinks the glib... You see, somebody said the other day, he just keeps on talking. He'll do as many radio interviews as possible. He'll keep running the lines through. But, Mr. Speaker, it won't change the central fact because, as I said at question time, when people go through the polls and they understand the code is the one thing that he shies away from, like Dracula from a wooden stake, and that is jobs, jobs. The one thing that you've never been able to produce. The one thing you've... You know what, Mr. Speaker?
Order!
Mr. Speaker, you know what his average was?
On my left.
Mr. Speaker, you know what his average was in jobs? It was 52,000 a year. In the years of his treasurership, a pathetic 52,000 a year. And this country and this government, you know what our average was right through the 12 years? 154,000 a year, 3 times as much. 3 times as great. 3 times as great. And then he's up there. And let me tell you another thing about the employment. Let me give you another, I think, reasonably impressive statistic. You know what the change in real household disposable income? Now, you know what that means. the disposable income of households, real household disposable income. You know the change since you? 40%. 40% increase in real household. You take a nation and bring a nation's disposable household income up by 40%. That is the change since you. Yet you say in your tawdry, opportunist way that we have scattered out on families and small business. Yes, you believe in families. You arrogantly believe that you can speak for families as if there's something you know about families that the rest of us don't, in such the most arrogant expression about families. Yet you say in families, but you don't believe in family support. You don't believe in payments to low-paid families. You don't believe in a family allowance supplement, additional family payment. You don't believe in Medicare. You've been trying to give a kick-up to doctors for the last 20 years of your life.
Order.
So, Mr Speaker, let's not burden you with families, because families are part of those people coming back into jobs who are in the white paper. They're the ones you think it's a spending spree on, the very same families. Mr Speaker, and he talks about interest rates and small business. Mr Speaker, small business died when he was in office. He left an industrial graveyard, industrial archaeology in his wake. It was basically the old anvil industries of the pre-war years. They were watching them close in Alexandria and all the industrial areas across Australia. When he walked out of office, he walked out with his head down. Mr Speaker, let the people of Australia understand this is the same guy with no ideas, the same simple ideas that are basically about cutting income for people on low and middle incomes, about kicking incomes up to the rich, about not understanding Australia's place in the world, about not understanding Australia's psychology or its identity, of having loyalties to other countries and other forums and other norms, and being out of touch with the modern Australia. Mr Speaker, John Howard would be a disaster for this country, a poor choice for the Liberal Party, and an absolutely disastrous choice for Australia.
The Honourable Leader of the National Party.
Nice try, very unconvincing. Very unconvincing.
Order.
You want another one tomorrow?
Order. The Leader of the National Party has the call.
Mr Speaker, it is with pleasure that I second the motion. And if we're going to get into spelling words, there's one other word I'd like to spell out to the House at this moment after the disgraceful performance of the Prime Minister. If there is a Prime Minister who is politically something, it is this. He's politically DEAD after today's performance. Politically dead after being done over by one of the most comprehensive speeches by a Leader of the Opposition ever given. There are turning moments.
Perhaps the Leader of the National Party needs my help, whereas the Leader of the Opposition didn't. Those on my right will cease interjecting.
We had the
Leader of the National
recycled
Party.
jokes. We had the accusations, the allegations from the Prime Minister, who dwelled on the so-called criminal taxation policy development. But who is the only Treasurer of this country to be a criminal and never and fail to put in an income tax return? None other than the Prime Minister. And if we want to go into the detail of the Prime Minister's speech, when he refers to the need for Australia to build its links with external nations, to build its timber industry product exports, to reverse the situation where Australia is a massive net importer of timber products, to particularize on one industry, let me take the Prime Minister back to 1957. Who was it that punctured through and brought about the breakthrough with building a trade treaty between Australia and Japan and Australia and Korea? It was the coalition government that had the foresight to do that. And if you want to bring forward to last year, 1994.
Order. Those on my right,
When
the
the
Leader of the
coalition
National
government-
Party has the call.
When in government, under Malcolm Fraser and Doug Anthony, developed extensive special relations between Australia and New Zealand, negotiated the crucial CER agreement between Australia and New Zealand. Guess what happened last year in relation to that, costing Australian inbound tourism industry jobs? Guess what really did happen? Drawing the ire of the Premier of Queensland, Premier Goss. We had the Prime Minister and the Minister for Transport and Aviation do a backroom deal, pull the pin on Air New Zealand, bring in protection in the skies, not in Australia's national interest, and jeopardise the whole spirit of CER. So in terms of externalities, it is the coalition that has the record. But if you want to get down to just one other point with regard to the Prime Minister, if you want to get down to a criteria that really counts, I turn none other to the Nat magazine, The Economist. You remember the Prime Minister quoting The Economist from time to time, an English magazine which the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and others choose to quote. And I look to this particular edition on page 20, and I find a little table, Mr Speaker, which perhaps goes to the core frustration of so many people seeking work at this time, so many people worried about their jobs at this time. It relates to the gap between rich and poor in Australia after 12 years of Labor government. And what does that table show? But the gap, so far as OECD countries, is greater in Australia than all other countries but one. The gap between rich and poor is greater in Australia than in New Zealand, than in Switzerland, than in Canada, than in Britain, than in France, than in Italy, Germany, Holland, Belgium, Sweden and Japan. 12 years Labor has enlarged the gap between rich and poor. That's the true legacy of this federal Labor government. That is why they will perish at the next federal elections, whenever they have the courage to bring them on, and that's why we stand ready to do battle with them. But if I look at the government, the one thing we didn't hear from the Prime Minister was any defence of the government's record, any detailed defence of the government's record. And we know why. Not only because of the gap between rich and poor, because of the national debt figure detailed so clearly by the Leader of the Opposition, because of a range of other factors, because of the internal agony of this government. Because I want to now bring to the House for the first time a copy of a letter from one member of this dispirited government, a member for Lyons, trying perhaps to make some effort to save some Tasmanian timber workers' jobs. He wrote to his colleagues last week, and I quote, "While all that was happening, those of us who might have been able to facilitate a more rational outcome couldn't get anywhere near the key decision makers. The fact that important information reaches the Green lobby several days before it reaches the unions, the timber industry leaders or the government is a solid indicator that we need a major overhaul of decision-making processes." That's the letter from the member for Lyons. Let him come in and deny it. He went on to say, "I can tell you that the claims made about the conservation values of a whole swag of primarily national estate forests in Tasmania are simply not true." There it is, a government member letting the cat out of the bag. You are guilty with regard to process in relation to the timber industry, and you are guilty with regard to outcome and lack of outcome with regard to the timber industry. And that is why this week, in conjunction with all my colleagues, including the Shadow Minister for the Environment, the Shadow Minister for Primary Industry, our senatorial colleagues, we have tried to bring this timber industry debate back to where it belongs, and that is with the National Forest Policy Statement signed a couple of years ago, but the tragedy is never acted on, never implemented, because the Commonwealth Government never gave the criteria to the state governments to proceed with their regional plans and assessments. Not a bad document, the good baseline for getting it right in the timber industry, for getting the answers that should have been out months ago, not with this schmozzle every 12 months, which has got out of hand this particular time around because of the total inadequacy of Minister Beddle and Minister Faulkner. I mean, where did that incredible list come from? And how can you stand up and defend that extraordinary list, the core of the Prime Minister's decision-making announcements of last Friday?
Not even Faulkner's been able to do that.
I have to say, Mr Speaker, it's a case of getting back to the drawing boards and fast, so these people who are and have been peacefully demonstrating in the course of this week in and around Canberra, as is their democratic right, can have some answers, can have some clear-cut answers with regard to their future jobs, not an unreasonable request. And I'm sorry the member has interjected because he's alluded to another thing the Prime Minister got wrong today, would you believe? The Prime Minister late this morning said that I'd displayed contempt for the institution to which he was elected, Parliament, by inciting demonstrators to disrupt question time today and on Monday. Well, I have to say I was.
Yeah, read the transcript.
And I have to say, I just happen to have the transcript here. And during personal explanation, I'll seek leave because I've shown it to the Leader of Government Business. In fact, if you like, I'll seek leave right now to table the transcript in relation to this matter when I spoke to the timber industry.
Leave granted.
It's perfectly reasonable. I showed it to Beasley. I thank you. And I table the transcript. And the reason I table the transcript is clear enough, Mr. Speaker, because what I was doing was talking to the friends in the timber industry. I wasn't being political. I was giving them information with regard to the sittings of both houses of parliament, something they are entitled to, whether you like it or not. And I said, when both houses were sitting, and some of them may have been out there listening this morning when I spoke just after the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, Ian Armstrong, and I said that both houses were scheduled to have question time today, something that, quite honestly, we might not always realise, the exact timing of which is not always known and familiar to members of the public. It's just sometimes they don't quite realise when question time is. So I explained question time is 2 o'clock in the Senate, 3 o'clock in the Reps. And I explained, but I asked a question of Minister Beasley yesterday, and I hope that there would be questions from both sides of the House today, from members of the House to the Prime Minister, on this, the time he's finally graced his presence in the Parliament for the first time this year. I think that was a perfectly reasonable explanation. It was interesting that the Prime Minister did not see to pursue the matter in the course of his privileged visit to the Parliament this afternoon. So what I want to say is how grateful the opposition is, how grateful the Australian public is, how grateful perhaps the timber workers are that finally our part-time Prime Minister has decided to put in a day's work and turn up at his dispatch box here in the House of Representatives. A little overdue. Can I say how humble we are to see Mr Keating in the Parliament today actually answering questions for the first time this year. How delighted we are to see who's man enough for one day out of this whole parliamentary week to attempt to answer some excellent questions from the Coalition. And isn't he doing a great job? All around us is evidence of his government's tremendous achievements. Timber workers and environmentalists alike, the army of the unemployed, average Australians all over the country who are delighted to be paying what I think the Prime Minister calls a dividend in the form of horrific increasing interest rates to keep their jobs and to keep growth. Mr Speaker, enough of the sarcasm. This Prime Minister and this government is an absolute disgrace. Does one need to repeat what the situation where how can you trust the Prime Minister and the Treasurer on the matter of interest rates? You simply can't. How can you trust the Prime Minister and Treasurer on the matter of the taxation structure for this next budget? You can't. How can you trust the Prime Minister on managing our timber resources? How can you trust the Prime Minister on seeking to balance the budget? And how can you even trust the Prime Minister on successfully opening one simple thing called a north-south runway at Mascot? Mr Speaker, the performance of this government is an absolute disgrace. They have not learnt that if you don't stick to an agreed and orderly process of conservation evaluation with regard to the timber industry and correct forest policy processes, the result will be what we see all around this parliamentary building today. This is not just an argy-bargy argument between timber workers and environmentalists. This is a complete failure of government policy process to arrive at decisions on time, in time to protect jobs and in a fair mannered and properly constructed way. It is indeed, Mr Speaker, a total failing of not only Minister Beddle but previous ministers who have held this portfolio, including the member for Maribyrnong, Minister Alan Griffiths, Senator Cook and others. I mean, they've all been sitting on this policy statement, along with the Ministers of Environment. And I just draw the attention of the House once again to who signed off on this policy statement. The Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia, Paul Keating. The Premier of the State of New South Wales, now and continuing after the 25th of March, John Fahey. Premier Jeff Kennett of Victoria. Premier Wayne Goss of Queensland. Premier, dare I say, then, of Western Australia, Dr Carmen Lawrence. Premier of South Australia, Lynn Arnold. The shortly to depart Chief Minister of the ACT Territory, Rosemary Follett. She goes on the 18th of February. And the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, Marshall Perrin. Now, I mean, in all seriousness, Mr Speaker, this is a pretty incredible document. You have governments of all political persuasions and constructions in this country sitting down 2 years ago and agreeing to this national forest policy statement. And with regard to Tasmania, they offered to sign a few weeks back, and the approach was declined at the time. And with regard to Tasmania, they met with the Prime Minister yesterday. They reached a partial agreement. The Prime Minister didn't like the press statement after, and in his best arrogant form decided to declare the meeting void. I mean,
He said that in writing.
But it never existed.
I mean, how arrogant with regard to Tasmanian jobs. How arrogant. It's got to the stage where it's almost like the Emperor approaching Parliament House each day with the Presidium Guards or the Lodge Legionnaires as they receive their orders from the Emperor. Push him out of the way or I'll push him out of the way. And if you want to give me a message, write to me. I mean, if he got out there and listened, the Prime Minister, if he got out of the capital city circuit and really put his head down to some decent town and city public meetings where he took questions from the floor of people, of members of the public, then he might realise how grievous things are really in Australia today. And he might then get back to comprehensive governance statements involving state and federal governments, such as this National Forest Policy Statement, and then we might see some breakthroughs, and then we might see some action. But the tragedy is, Mr Speaker, not only is he a part-time Prime Minister, a phrase so well coined by the Leader of the Opposition, he's going to depart Australia next month. And let me put it in perspective.
Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister is going to attend the CeBIT fair in Germany as part of a 5-day visit to Germany. Let me place on the record my full support for the Prime Minister attending the CeBIT affair. But let him release the rest of his itinerary, because I hear that he's going holidaying and job hunting in Europe for a period of time on either side of his visit to Germany. So let him put it on the public record just what he is doing in Europe. He's entitled to visit his family, of course. I would not stand in the way of that. But it's about time he applied himself full-time to the job of Prime Minister of this country and got out there and protected the jobs of people, fair dinkum people, wanting a fair go, be they in the timber industry or every other industry of Australia. The sooner, the better.
The Honourable Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, this government is always happy to have a debate about jobs. And let me just give the House one statistic about jobs which sums up the difference between the two parties. When the now Leader of the Opposition was Treasurer, his government managed to produce 260,000 jobs in 5 years. This year we will create 300,000 jobs in 1 year. What a massive difference. What an extraordinary difference in the ability of governments to produce jobs for the Australian people. That one statistic says it all about the capacity of the two sides of this House. One which can deliver, and has delivered nearly 2 million jobs since it's been in government, and producing 300,000 in this 1 year, and an opposition when in its last 5 years, when the now Leader of the Opposition was Treasurer, produced less than 300,000 jobs in 5 years. Now, what a comparison that is. Mr Speaker, it says a lot. But it also says a lot today to listen to this debate, the first censure motion by the third opposition leader in 8 months. The third in 8 months. And what did he have to say? If you're looking to this speech to say, well, here it is, a serious debate in the Parliament, a censure motion, where you're supposed to treat it very seriously and listen closely to what the opposition has to say. That's the form of the House. You listen to see whether there's anything they have to say which might make one think that they should be the government rather than the government. Could anyone listening to the effort by the Leader of the Opposition today really feel as though he was the next Prime Minister of this country? How could you possibly have that view? There was not one shred of substance, not one element which showed any thinking about policy whatever. He just talked about problems, but he had not one constructive idea. Not a semblance of a constructive idea. For 20 minutes he spoke and you heard nothing from him about what he would do about anything. All you heard was complaints about attempts to play it for laughs with his own backbench in the gallery. You heard nothing of substance. And what the people want in a Prime Minister of this country is a man of substance. or a woman of substance. They want a person who can lead the country and do it in a way which produces decent outcomes for the Australian people. And it's certainly the case that when the now Leader of the Opposition was the Treasurer and a very important person in the Fraser government, that was not what was delivered for the Australian people. And everyone in the country knows that to be the case. At least if they don't know it, they look back at the record, they'll realise that to be the case. And so it's an appalling indictment of the new Leader of the Opposition who stands up here today with a record as a failed Treasurer, a record as a failed Leader of the Opposition, recycled again to sort of supposedly offer some hope to the Australian people that the opposition might be a credible alternative. And what does he produce today? A load of garbage. A load of garbage. Not one sensible idea put forward, not even the skerrick of an idea. Now, Mr. Speaker, that in itself is an indictment, but it's just running true to form, because that's what we've heard from the opposition since they abandoned Fight Back. They essentially don't know where they are. With Fight Back, at least they had some semblance of what they stood for. And when the Australian people examined that, they realised it was a particularly nasty piece of goods and they weren't going to have anything of it. But now that they've abandoned that, they're just floating around in a policy vacuum. They haven't got any idea what they stand for. And when they do indicate a direction, is there any substance that comes behind it? No, you never hear any substance. They say they want to reduce the deficit. By how much do they want to reduce the deficit? They'll never say. They do say that they should do it by cuts in government expenditure. What cuts in government expenditure? You never hear any detail about cuts in government expenditure because they haven't got the guts or the intelligence or the policy framework to put forward a sensible or any sort of nonsensible array of specific proposals. So they're trying to run for government, trying to tell the Australian people that they have something to offer, but they have nothing of substance to provide at all. And of course, the strategy of the now dismissed previous Leader of the Opposition was to keep whatever he had, which was probably, you could put it in your pocket, I imagine. It was probably an absolutely empty array of ideas. But anyway, he had whatever he did have, he was going to keep to himself until the election was announced. And he'd say, hey, presto, here's our set of ideas to show that we should be the alternative government. And hope that in the course of an election campaign that no one would have time to look at them properly. Well, of course, what a pathetic approach that